welcome to Gayfield Creative Spaces. My name's John Ennis. Having said a warm welcome, you might just want to put your coats on because it's a little chilly. At Gayfield, we've been exploring where art and design meet health and well-being, sustainability and wealth creation for local communities. We also hold dear the notion that we all stand taller in the world when we can reach out to countries and cultures other than our own, exchanging ideas and learning from one another. So it's with great pleasure tonight that we're launching our African Roots programme with a talk by Renee Neblett from Kokrobitey Institute in Ghana in West Africa. This talk is co-sponsored by the Alero Olympio Trust. Really joyous to have seen and greeted so many familiar faces here tonight. As some of you know well, Alero Olympio was a talented architect with a passion for sustainable design. It was 20 years ago that I first visited Ghana. Shortly after that visit, Alero and I founded a company which sought, in part, to challenge the breeze block building culture in and around Accra, Ghana's capital. Drawing on Alero's research into more sustainable materials, we imported brick-making machines from Oryoville in India, a world centre for sustainable technologies. West Africa is a rich source of laterite, that red soil you'll be familiar with from Arizona and the Australian outback. With just 20% cement, our imported machines could produce air-dried bricks from the laterite mix. It was a simple notion. Instead of importing concrete at expense, we made use of natural local resources. With Alero's passing, Morag Stocks and I established the Alero Olympio Trust to support the key aims evident in Alero's work, promoting the ideas of sustainable architecture in developing countries. We're delighted this evening then to announce that the Trust is working with Renee Neblett in creating a design centre at Kokrobitey Institute named in honour of Alero Olympio. As I noted, it's a great privilege tonight to have another extraordinary and pioneering woman with us. Renee Neblett founded the Kokrobitey Institute in 1993, bringing together innovative thinkers and doers from diverse cultures and disciplines committed to education, environmental sustainability and social entrepreneurship. Thank you for coming to speak with us tonight, Renee. Thank you everyone here present. We have time to take some questions at the end, and I'll hand over now to Renee Neblett. Thank you very much.
Wow, what a lovely turnout. Thank you for coming. John, thank you too for the invitation. It's kind of like, it's wonderful being back in Edinburgh. Feels like being home a bit, especially the important work Alero did with helping to establish the Institute. And you'll see a couple of images. Anyway, tonight I just want to say something about development or environmental sustainability. Environmental sustainability can only be achieved globally. Environmental sustainability can only be achieved globally. Developed nations investing in the developing world should be obliged to answer two questions. If we'd known then what we know now, how would we have proceeded here? Knowing now what we didn't know then, how should we proceed there? Talking about developing nations. At its core, development is an instrument of culture and identity. Behind these sweeping technological trends that so intrigue us are communities of people living their day-to-day lives. And this is where the conversation about development must begin, at the level of the human experience. What better way to explore the human experience than through art and design? I live in Ghana, near Accra, the capital city, a capital city being transformed by outside investment in recent years. With its new roads, luxury apartments, boutique hotels, world-class restaurants, Accra typifies the economic potential of the 21st century Africa. But one need only to scratch the glittering surface to find a city in crisis, an ecosystem in collapse, and a civil society in decline. Every year, due to poor sewage systems, Accra suffers catastrophic flooding during the rainy season. The Ghanaian government is rationing electricity at an unprecedented rate. Public services, health care, education, waste management are all far from adequate. Meanwhile, Ghana's burgeoning consumer culture has exacerbated social inequality. For all the foreign investment flooding into Ghana, quality of life for the everyday Ghanaians has not improved. By no means unique to the Ghanaian context, these observations call into question the meaning of investment. What is investment? Who benefits from investment? Who benefits from investment within the current model of development? And what could or should investment look like if we were to view it through the lens of our collective well-being? Development, driven and modeled completely outside of local environments, often disrupts ways of life that were, for the most part, sustainable. Cement replaces earth bricks. Tin replaces thatched roofs. The plastic buckets replace the clay pot. Polyurethane bags replace the banana leaf for the packaging of food. With the introduction of plastics and other non-biodegradable products, and no indigenous infrastructure for dealing with this kind of waste, litter overwhelms a previously pristine landscape. Is this progress? In the midst of this worldwide discourse on sustainability, the question must be asked, or needs to be asked, why are we eroding functioning green systems and replacing them with systems that have already been proven to be unsustainable? Why are we replacing in the developing world those practices that have damaged the developed world, perhaps irrevocably, if we as a global community are sincere about our commitment to environmental sustainability or environmental stability? Then we need a new model of development, a new model that prioritizes the prudent management of limited natural resources by building upon existing sustainable practices central to local traditions. That's the beauty of it. Most African developing countries still have local traditions that are sustainable. We should be exploring those practices, preserving those verdant landscapes, and trying to keep a balanced ecosystem in our world. Development in Africa or anywhere in the world is not only about sustainability in that area, as it's not only about African progress, but rather sustainability is about global well-being. If we believe that development must begin with sustainability, then the African continent presents an opportunity to reimagine a model of sustainable development. If we don't get environmental sustainability right in the developing world, we will continue to suffer environmental collapse around the world. It's therefore in the global interest, and in fact perhaps essential, to recognize the opportunity that a country like Ghana, a developing nation, provides us in our quest for global well-being. Why art? Why is art important in all of this? Art forces us to examine the familiar and to engage with the new. It engages us viscerally, emotionally, and intellectually. Art invites us to ask vital questions. Through art, we can examine how local communities understand their environment in relationship to the broader world, while identifying the forces that fuel the current paradigm of development and tracing their origins. Through art, we can invite everyone for a moment into the same place and talk about sustainability. Welcome. We can talk about sustainability in the global community, development, and the future. Only once we've understood where we are and how we got where we are can we begin to conceptualize meaningful change and make our actions moving forward with awareness and intention. Art is discourse. It's awareness. It's about education. It's about beauty. It's about the moment's truth. It's about how we live our lives. And it really is about the world we live in. That's how I'd like to start our discussion tonight. What I'd like to do from there, and I hope I said what I said quietly enough or clearly enough that it will resonate a bit. I want to share a project we have at the Kokrobitey Institute, and I'd like to tell you just a little bit about the Institute. Kokrobitey Institute is a small institute in Ghana. It has a residential campus, and we actually set out trying to provide an extension initially to American education, to provide a forum for children to kind of extend, not just American education, European education, for children to extend the borders of the world thought worth knowing about by providing short-term learning programs in West Africa. I've been living in Ghana 25 years. And when I first went to Ghana, it was paradise, absolute paradise. And I've watched over the past 25 years the impact that development or investment from the West has had on that verdant landscape. That observation has challenged the Institute and me in many ways, because we had to really reassess and re-examine what we were doing in that country and who were we. It's one thing to have a vision of something, and it's another thing to live in the community in which you exist, which is really your obligation. And so we, some years ago, when we first went to Ghana, I think on the road that Kokrobitey is situated, we used to see a vehicle maybe once every 2 weeks come up that road. Now there's a traffic jam getting down the road from Kokrobitey. And so we've had to end the students that we were bringing. Now everybody's looking for tourism and tourists. And so there's this struggle for students, and that made us really think about, well, who are we? What is Kokrobitey doing? And what is our role in that environment? That coupled with just watching the incredible change that the emerging market economy has made to the local environment. Anyway, I just wanted to show a couple of pictures of the Institute, which is still rather beautiful and verdant. And that's in testimony to the work that Olero did. And those bricks are the bricks we produced. Every brick at Kokrobitey Institute was produced by hand and is produced out of laterite with those very machines that you brought from Oroville. That's more what a lot of places in different villages look like now. It always amazes me when when we from afar are looking at images of developing nations, and we're so overwhelmed by the poverty and the filth that it looks like people are living in. In fact, this is what development brought them. The image I showed you before was how they were living before development got to them. And that's not to say that there's not a small group of people who, at the top get to make the deals and participate in the business and be involved in wealth creation at that level, don't make money. But for the majority of the people in developing nations, that's what development does for them. Anyway, we could take a long time talking about all this, but I want to jump to what our observations about what was happening in the village of Kokrobitey specifically moved us to do. It was very interesting, one, watching the landscape change and the litter just kind of overwhelm the beauty of the place. It was also interesting to watch the young people who were kind of betwixt and between two worlds. They no longer wanted to participate in the occupations of their parents. They didn't aspire to be fishermen and farmers, but they were in no way equipped to access any of the jobs that might be available in the world of that emerging market economy. And really looking at that, because literally when I went there, I saw kids, I met young people who were 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, and 25 years old, grown people without any education and very little possibility to think about making a worthwhile living. So we decided that Kokrobitey Institute was going to not stop bringing students from abroad, but to expand our vision and to work in the community. We identified 3 things, and that was that we looked at. One was environmental sustainability, the other was the need for education, the other was job creation. Because it's very difficult to have people listen to you if all they really want to do is eat. And I learned that lesson. I'm going to take you through it. I learned that lesson the hard way. But anyway, the first thing we decided to do with sustainability was to see if we could have an impact on working with recycled materials, plastics. And we embarked on a training program, and the first thing we thought we would do is try to make a product that we thought was symbolic. So we came up with the idea of producing a recycled school bag. But obviously, to do that, we had to train young people in the local community. And we were very fortunate to raise funds, start with 20 young people in the village. And our goal was to teach them how to make a bag. But we realized that wasn't enough, that we wanted to also provide them some basic education that would allow them to understand something about the culture of the world they had to navigate, you know, how to prioritize, how to communicate well, how to work as a team, you know. Anyway, again, I'm showing this image because we didn't really have a facility to produce anything in. You know, and I had watched so many people, you know, trying to jump on the bandwagon of development with the promise of opportunities to export products. And they say, a company would come over and say, we want to, you know, with the ceramics, for example, we want to order 50,000 of your small clay pots. And people would get giddy with excitement, and they'd run around with their letter, and they'd run to the bank, and they'd borrow money, and they'd build the facility, and, you know, go in debt. And that company would come back maybe and order another 50,000. And then next year, they didn't order anything. And there you had this poor person who thought he was ascending to the world of the market economy in horrific debt. So I thought, you know, we're going to do this step by step and use what we have. And so we simply just put an awning over there and built a simple facility. It kind of looked like pre-industrial revolution. Anyway, we managed to produce bags and to work with the local kids. And it was a training program that had classes, but it was a kind of on-the-job training program. The classes that supplemented trying to develop some reading and writing skills and other abilities to work. And also workshops around, you know, examining the quality of the goods we produced and making sure we had a quality product. But it was interesting because, as I said, we learned a lot of lessons in that. It's not so easy to merge worlds together. And somewhere between there, I realized that we were dealing with 2 distinct cultures. And I think it was one evening when I was sitting down trying to develop a classroom activity around communication, because everybody who comes to Ghana is always, when we're working with local people, there always seems to be so much difficulty communicating. And one day I was sitting there trying to write a lesson plan. I thought, it seems so odd that communication would be a problem in a society that has a strong oral tradition and everybody's communicating all the time. And so I sat down there and tried to just write down all the places I had experienced miscommunication, or where my people I know, whether they were Ghanaian, local Ghanaians, people in the village, you know, people with businesses, restaurants, house help. And it was always had to do around the market economy. If you're going through the village, people are chatting under trees and everybody's communicating. But there's this incredible space between the 2 worlds, between the world of the emerging market economy and the local economy. And so we kind of came up with this term, emerging landscapes, to try to make sense of what does that mean? You know, what does it mean? And what you find out is that the presence of the emerging market economy is so enormous. It just takes over everything. And you have to understand that the people in the village have not done one single thing to bring on this market economy. They're just sitting there, and it's just coming to sit on their heads. People say, well, why aren't they more forthcoming? Why aren't they more active in making decisions about their own future? Because they're completely overwhelmed. they're just trying to make sense of how do you make a living day to day. Everything they know just keeps shifting and shifting and shifting. Nobody's an engine. People are just trying to make do. So as I said, we coined this term, emerging landscapes. You know, and having experience in the world, I thought to myself, wow, here you've got this huge, well, not huge, but this growing community of money makers and I thought, and corporate businesses. And I thought, you know what, they should really be responsible. Businesses that are coming to Ghana should play a role in education. And I have to say, you know, when you've had an opportunity for a broader international experience, you can see opportunities where people who are there every day wouldn't imagine that a corporate entity should have some responsibility to them. They're so overwhelmed by the language of development. You know, people get so giddy when somebody says investment. They're going to make investments. Somehow they just imagine that means many jobs and money. And, you know, we all know investment is for the investor. You know. But it's very unfortunate, that kind of disconnect. Anyway, we decided that we were going to try to see if we could get businesses, to appeal to businesses. And we wanted to expand the way we appeal to businesses. Not just appeal to them the same way to go for their corporate social responsibility monies, but say, ask them if they would consider sponsoring school bags and maybe using educational materials, for example, helping us develop educational materials, say in telecommunications and banking, in environmental sustainability, that they could brand. And it was simply trying to also use the opportunity of the school bag as a vessel to take information to children. So we actually, with the help of one fast-moving consumer goods corporation, managed to put together a series of flashcards on the environment that went in. And these are very lovely pictures of schools. Most of the schools are pretty desperate. You know, if one is honest, once you get out of the capital and you go into rural areas, schools are really desperate. They have very, very little material. And the natural things they have, because people are so overwhelmed by the modern world, you know, they're so keen to build structures that you'll actually have cement structures with a window that large when they'd have been better off sitting under a tree with a cool breeze. But they're so overwhelmed by the thought that everything is supposed to be a structure, a building, that actually things work against themselves. Anyway, once you get into schools, when I say desperate, I'm not saying that lightly. Even places where international organizations provide latrines for schools. They provide latrines, but they never teach people how to take care of them. And I'm sure everybody, when you're growing up, had to learn how to clean a toilet or how to clean things. You're not just born knowing that. And unfortunately, after time, those very facilities are horror shows because people instinctively just don't know how to clean them. They've never had one before. But there's so many assumptions. There's such a horrific disconnect. So we decided that aside from just giving children educational materials, that you really need to start with something very basic. And so this idea of cleanliness and order and trying to meet people where they are. So we were fortunate. We were very fortunate. After we came up with the idea of making a school bag, literally we had 3 sewing machines, and somebody came, a school, you know, the schools also are very interesting things in developing countries because they're almost businesses. You know, people in developing countries are very keen about education. People are always coming up with new schools, you know. And this one organization designed a school model because people have to pay for school. And even though it seems like, you know, what, maybe $20 a month or something seems like very little to us, it's a lot of money for somebody who's making maybe $400 a year, you know. So people design schools, and this one fellow came up with an idea where students could pay 1 CD a day rather than having to take their 30 CDs for the whole semester. They pay 1 CD a day. And it really turns out to be a kind of pyramid scheme because they just build schools, and everybody's happy to think their child's going to a private school opposed to the government school. You know. And you would think that anyway, so he promised people for for their 1 CD a day that they get a uniform and a school bag. And so Eureka, they come to us and said, "You make recycled bags?" Yes. I said, "Yeah." He said, "We like 20,000. I said, So I can remember they invited me to the school office, and I went with one of the people in the design center, one of my workers. I think we had 4 sewing machines at the time. And so he started talking to me. He said, "Could you make us 20,000 school bags?" I said, "Yes." I said, yes, we can. And so we started negotiating the price, and we were walking out, and my worker turned to me and said, "Can we make 20,000 school bags?" I said, "No, but somebody can." That I'm sure of. But what was beautiful about it, it helped us build capacity. And in fact, we did get those 20,000 bags made. And what we did was we went to other people and outsourced and bought a couple more machines and trained some other people. And those pictures you saw actually had those young kids working, producing those school bags. But once we got into the schools, after I saw this, I thought, these school bags and uniforms, you go into school, they're on a dirt floor, the place is horrible. So it was just unbelievable. So we thought, in a very clever way, let's see if we can work with the school system and maybe help him with some materials that could have the children think differently about their environment with the local culture. So we came up with the idea of making these environmental clubs so that the students actually came to Kokrobitey. There was one of these schools right in our village, so we ran an after-school program for that school. Asase is a Dinka symbol in the Akan culture that means the earth has provenance. So we call it the Asase Club. And so we had the kids make little gardens, recycle tires, make hanging gardens. I just got the kids engaged after school. It was really great fun. It was wonderful just to see how quickly young people absorb things. And also with the idea of, was to think about, have some beauty. You know, that rubbish could actually turn into something rather aesthetically pleasing. And then we went back again to the idea of corporations being involved in what's going on. So they have one large organization called Zoom Lion, which is the largest, if not the only, one of the only waste management facilities in Ghana. So we appealed to them they haven't done this yet, by the way. These are just good images. They have not yet bit, but we're still working with them to see if they would take that lovely name of theirs and see if they could start some environmental clubs around the country. You know, and organize the kids, you know, and start trying to identify, educate, and honor young kids rather than walking around with your little switch and, you know. But we did continue with the school, and we were very fortunate to have a couple of teachers that really took on the idea, but we haven't given it up. And then in the design center, once we made the bags, actually making the bag and having people respond to the bag helped us begin to nurture a culture of design and innovation at the design center. And it actually, you know, served our whole goal of bringing students, because all of a sudden we started going specifically for students who were interested in education, design, art, and development. And so we had a challenge where we thought, can we design a kit to help organize classrooms so that kids could wash their hands? And so we took the water bottles. There was a clean water, soapy water. See if we could encourage a culture of hand washing and cleanliness. Could we have kids have personal property? Because if you've been, if things are not personal somehow, they don't get taken care of in the schools. I mean, you literally see children sitting on chairs that one of them, they're literally holding it up with their knee. We kept getting more and more ambitious. Isn't this exciting? Huh? So we started that, and it's all still working. We thought, but if we're making everything, we should try to get the teachers engaged in the process of making things. So we came up with the idea of the Makers Workshop. How can we show teachers and work with teachers so that they're... And we came across this idea because people, the wonderful thing about the developing world is people still can use their hands. I mean, one of the most marvelous things I always tell people when I first went to Ghana, I remember that life was very different. When we went to Kokrobitey, there was a store, there wasn't electricity, there was nothing there that I associate with development and wealth. But I distinctly remember never thinking of the people as poor. It's only recently, since development's come, that people are poor. But I can distinctly remember when I first went there, I was overwhelmed by the way of life. It was completely different, and I'm not saying there shouldn't be development. I'm not trying to say that everybody needs to stay in the Stone Age, but I'm saying I didn't think of people as poor. People were very resourceful. I used to sit there and watch the security guard, our night watchman, take pieces of sisal and just take the pulp off the plant, take the fiber out and twist it into rope that he sold. I mean, it was amazing to me just what people knew. So we did actually get people engaged in making things. We expanded the space in the design center, got teachers involved, and as I said, it was very easy to have people work because they're used to working with their hands. And we took egg crates and made sound cylinders because people were always talking about, if you ask a teacher, what's your biggest challenge? We don't have any teaching and learning materials. Once the store came and all the things that were being imported came, all of a sudden people never had anything. Okay? Before they had a full life. But once the store came and there was another reference point, they never had anything. We don't have teaching and learning. We don't have that. So we started making a few teaching and learning materials. And then we actually started working in the school. And we were lucky. We went to another corporation. We just twisting them here and there. And we got an oil company to ask us if we would go to a community and teach people about oil, to see what they knew about oil and gas. And I was kind of like, ooh, an oil company, oil and gas, And then we thought about it. We said, well, somebody is going to do that. So we asked them, can we work in the schools? Can we go to a school and work with teachers to help develop literacy, to see how well children were reading, how capable they were to know about oil and gas. And what we found is that most of the children were not literate, and that the reading skills were really very low. Not only did the children not read well, the teachers didn't read well, which was really amazing. Most people didn't know the difference between the letter and the sound a letter made. So here we had all these grandiose ideas about makers' workshops and da-da-da-da. We got to very basic stuff, and people can't read. And in the process, we realized that the problem is not just reading, but it's being able, not just reading the word, not just being able to comprehend the written word, but it's also, we realize that most of us are not really literate when it comes to reading the world and reading our role in it. That all of us are obliged to think of literacy in a much broader way than we've thought about what it means to be literate. But anyway, we tried to take on that challenge and started developing phonics, because we realized the kids who could read, I know I'm taking you on a long trip. Is it too long? Because we're getting to the end, but I just thought it's nice to get your feet in, to have a little bit of understanding. We decided that, okay, let's take on that challenge of reading. And we decided, once we observed it, we realized most of the kids learned to read through memorization, through context, inference, or imagery. And what you realize is that most of the kids go to school and their instruction is in English, but most of them speak their mother tongue at home. And so people are teaching them to read in the most ridiculous way. It's just memorized word. The teacher says it over and over. They write words on a sentence, and the kids say it over and over and over again. And eventually some of them memorize it, and luckily they recognize it, the fast ones. And that's always the premium. He's a bright one. This is a bright one. That's a bright one. And so we decided to try to teach phonics. And in the process of teaching phonics, we also, and I think what's interesting is that it took a long time. I think I've been there 25 years and really had no understanding of the breadth and depth of all the challenges. It was just amazing to me. And as someone who's taught for years, to just understand the difference in teaching phonics, as I had taught phonics when I taught in America and when I taught in Europe, and how I learned phonics. I realized that teaching phonics in Ghana was different, that you should really teach phonics or teach reading as though you're teaching English as a second language. I was like, boom, eureka. where people come in with all these big plans and the USAID and they come in with a phonics program that's marginally effective. And also, the opportunity we observed was the chance to teach phonics as an active act of critical thinking, literacy. Okay, why? What do you mean? Well, with phonics, most developing countries have a chalk and talk system. The measure of a good student is how obedient the student is. Students are really discouraged culturally from asking questions. So we found in this little space of phonics that, one, the teacher has to be engaged. They have to open their mouth and say A. This is the letter A. What sound does it make? Children have to hear their own voice. Children have to recognize patterns. They have to be engaged in dialogue. They have to try. They have to fail. And they learn. That's an active act of critical thinking. How do you capitalize on that? How do you use that? And here's the teachers. And I'm showing this picture because I'm very proud of this, because that was the same room you're looking at, and with the teachers, that's that same room. And the only difference in that room, and the one before, is we took pieces of literally cheesecloth and old PVC pipes and nailed them up and organized the books and painted the floor. And here's our approach. And we had some wonderful young Ghanaian students that we enlisted who have took the phonics project. And here, here's classroom activity and here's learning tools. And the kids could get out of their seat. We made them the letters. And they could put the letters around, and if you're smart, you see that those few little letters there, you can make about 10 words. There's in and it and pain and I mean, it's just marvelous. And so, you had kids really engaged in this process. But let me go ahead. But we realized that the project was coming to an end. And when corporations give you money, they're breathing down your neck. It's not a joke. You're like this the whole time. How many more weeks do we have? What have we done? They all want to observe measurable achievement and success. And we realized that in this whole process, first of all, it was going to be impossible to show any real measurable change in that classroom around literacy in 11 months. Okay? It was going to be impossible. And what we also realized is that the problem is much larger than that. It really is about sustained intervention. It really is about discourse and culture and art and the community, because culture lives in community. It's really about dialogue, that we were never going to do anything. And so what we did was stretch our limited resources, work 10 times harder than they paid us to, and we built a resource center in that community. And the idea of the reason we built this resource center and got all the teachers involved in the process was to create in that little village one space that could be a reference point for what a structure from the market economy could look like. Most people living in villages have most of their things in a trunk. Their cooking utensils, their clothing, they're all in little places. There's a whole different way of living. And we thought if we could provide one model where everything has a place, where people can, it's for the school, it's for the community, it's for the chieftaincy, it's for visiting people, that maybe this space could create a forum for dialogue where people could start to look at what development means critically. We're just at the beginning of this. I'm just sharing this because we don't know where it's going, but we know the old ways of doing this are not going to work. And it's not a linear process, development. Everybody has to come to that space. And to make things. This is our little phonics corner. These little shelves. And, okay, let me just show this very quickly. Whoops. How to make a waistband. And okay, and this is very nice because this is about literacy too. If you notice, this little village where the oil's coming now, where they've discovered oil and there's a gas plant, that little street where there was just goats and cows crossing will now have about 100 trucks going up and down the road. And so in this little room, we made it this special room so that the teachers in the village can bring their students for special activities. And literacy, more than reading and writing, means the ability to cross a street. Even the adults in that community need to learn what it means now to cross the street. That's not just dodging goats and cows. Yeah. And then there's a lot of fun things in there too. And then, okay, I'm going to go back with the creative experimentation stuff. At the base of this, I also realized that the oil company and those people don't really give a damn if we make a resource center where people learn to cross the street, where people are coming to have discourse, where the kids will have fun learning, play games with their little car, making believe they're buying petrol and doing math lessons. They don't really care. What we had to do was convince them that we could also create jobs, that somehow looking at sustainability and development could be related to job creation. So we went back to the Institute and we brainstormed all the things that could possibly be made that could provide jobs in the local community using local occupations and recycled materials to provide income-generating activities. That's when you get their ear. And here's some simple things like taking bottles and melting them and making condiment dishes out of them. And there's a bunch of those images I could show, but anyway, we got their attention with that. What you could do with recycling, pop-up stores. And we also convinced them if they supported us, we would take on the challenge of trying to make that little village of Beyin a tourist destination built on education, development, and sustainability. And that's the shot. I'll just leave that there. That's the way we propose to do it. And that's all, folks.
Renee, that was remarkable. No, really, I'm sure like most people here, not provided. I've got some burning questions, and I hope if anyone's in the audience that they'd like to pitch a couple of questions. Mine was that notion of reference points. What an extraordinary, vivid idea you conveyed when people weren't poor until a reference point with a store gave them some notion that they were poor.
And they were deprived.
And they were right. That's a very difficult one to trace, to lose once it's there, isn't it? I think what you're doing is providing an alternative reference point in some respects with what you're achieving with the recycled goods.
Yeah, I mean, people are going to aspire to all of those things, and I don't mean that they shouldn't have stores. What I do mean is that resourcefulness and that ability to take care of your environment shouldn't be lost. And in fact, Ghana, or Accra, of Ghana, and that little village that we're working in, is a model of sustainability. It was a model of sustainability. There's things we should be learning. I mean, I'm always amazed at little things. When I first went there and watched somebody wash their hands, okay, if people who schlep water for a mile, what they can do with a cup of water will make you wonder. Okay? Kids have a cup of water in the morning. One kid holds it, and they pour it, and the little one, they suds, and they scrub up and scrub, and then they take that water and rinse. And trust me, it's almost the same sensation. Water's beautiful. But when you've just been used to plopping in a tub, then that becomes the reference. Those are intellectual properties we should be gathering and sharing with the rest of the world. But sometimes when you're in the you can't see the forest for the trees, that people don't even know what they're losing. All the things that we're desperately trying to get back to, organic farming, water preservation, are the things they were doing. And from a development point of view, those of us in the West are selling them a completely different model. And we're bigger and stronger and faster, and we can do it. We can sell that model. And I'm saying the big challenge is for us to question ourselves and ask ourselves, what are we doing? I mean, it's very easy to be seduced by those pictures of that poor child sitting in that heap of trash, to send that dollar, that euro, that 3 into, buy them, a school bag or buy them this. But where did that trash come from?
I have a background in policy in the UK, and one of the key problems in policy in the UK is actually trust. Is that when you analyse it, no one trusts anyone else, and so if you give like £5 to a church, let's use this as an example, you'll spend at least £4 on the accountants making sure that the £5 went to the right place, and actually you'll spend much less on whether the £5 actually did anything. And the crucial thing is that whoever you gave the £5 to, you don't intrinsically trust, because they have to then be checked. And actually it's a real problem for us now, so we spend money and nothing really happens. And Scottish poverty is a great example of that. We've been spending money for 40 years and it hasn't really shifted at all. So I just wonder though, how do you instill trust, or how do you keep trust in a system which perhaps isn't quite as bureaucratically corrupted as ours?
What system are you talking about? Are you talking about the government of Ghana?
What?
Are you talking about the government of Ghana?
Oh no, sorry. So I'm sort of saying that when you have perhaps an overdeveloped system such as ours, you've actually lost so many basic elements, which is the trust that someone might be actually there to do the right thing. They might get things occasionally wrong, but broadly, if you give them time, they're probably trying to get things right. And we've kind of ironed that out of the system. And maybe you have a chance to kind of capture that before it's completely ironed out.
Yeah, you know what it is. I mean, it's the same. It really has to do with size, I think. With anonymity. When things get so large that there's so many anonymous people on that chain, that's when it kind of gets out of sorts. And I don't want to suggest that there's not a lot of people making very sincere efforts. They're usually the smaller ones, making very sincere efforts on the ground to make things happen. I think it's the coming together, it's trying to provide forums for these various groups of people who are doing real work. I mean, again, one of the things that I find really unpleasant is the language of development. What development means, what investment is supposed to mean. People are so seduced by those words. I would love to have an exhibition someplace where we kind of gather statistics and ask ourselves, how much money has been invested in education, for example, from all around the world in some place like Ghana. How much has been invested in natural resources or oil and gas? How much has been invested in infrastructure? And I bet you'd find some really interesting things in terms of return on investment. There's no real interest in educating people. There's been millions and millions and millions of dollars spent on education. Okay, and still kids cannot read. But if you ask about, what roads were built, well, those roads will get that oil and that gas to where they need to go. And so I think it's about kind of restructuring the discourse where all of us assume some responsibility, all of us who are policymakers, and look at, even when those of us who are passionate about sustainable development here, and we're busy trying to make that happen, we somehow still don't see it in the global context. It's ridiculous. It's like being a little bit pregnant. I mean, you're not going to be sustainable in Denmark and then not sustainable in Ghana. We live in the same world. We breathe the same air. And so the whole discourse, I think I'm trying to niggle people to say that it's just about trying to open this thing up. And it's not doom and gloom. Because it's every day we're working. Every day we're having discussions. Every day we're thinking about policy. Every day people are tackling these issues. All it is expanding the references and the information we have so we can make more informed decisions and better efforts.
Most talks on development, people use the word science and technology at some point. You didn't, but I know you know a lot, right? And I'm just curious, where is their place?
For science and technology?
In your view of development?
front and center, I guess. I mean,
But you,
science and technology is the same. It's the same. It's just it has to be thoughtful. I mean, do I think that every kid in Ghana in schools need a computer right now? No, to be honest. I think that's putting the cart before the horse. I think that people need, you've got a country that has an airport city and 70% of the people don't have toilets. Okay, and computers on some level are just as smart as you are. You ask them questions, you search information, that's what you're going to get. I think we need to try to develop literacy first. So that, that people who have that expertise and know about science and technology need to come to the table with other people and figure out, where does that fit? I mean, it is, we were having a conversation last night, and it is fortuitous that, now there's mobile phones, and so, they didn't have to put up telephone lines, and that's a great thing. And mobile phones, are very helpful. Now you've got people who are using them on farms, and people can transfer monies. It's real useful technology. But I think you have to cut your cloth to fit your coat, and see what people need, what really is a more urgent commodity.
So how do you involve those people, the science and technology leaders, in that discourse that you're planning?
Invite them.
Let's do it.
Oh, yeah, invite them.
But I suppose my question was then, obviously you're saying over here our technology is very advanced, and you've got little children growing up how to use tablets and how to use mobile phones straight off without even knowing language first. So how, in the world of tourism that's there, how do we then develop that to then educate the West from what Ghana can offer?
Mm-hmm. I think further back in the presentation, I talked about literacy. And I said that literacy is more than just reading the word. And I think that's something that needs to be done, that, education is about teaching people to think, and to think critically, and to know where they are and what they're thinking about. And I think that's a discussion that needs to take place more vigorously. And in the West, I look at what's happening in America right now. There's clearly not a lot of enlightenment when you think of who's getting ready to run for the highest office in that country. It makes you frightened about the level of literacy. So I don't, it's easier. I'm just making observations about all the things that need to be done. It would take a collective, a whole village for us to, but if you can't ask the question, the hardest thing is not the answer, is asking the right questions, really, so that you can get someplace. But with this chart, if you're referencing this, all I tried to do with this idea of the notion of a community resource center, and the resource center really is, you're talking about most people who are living still in very simple structures. There's no health facilities. There's no, very basic structures. And everybody comes through. I've gone to villages where organizations have come in and given them flat screen TVs. So there's the one light hanging in the middle of the room, and there's the flat screen TV. And that's been locked up and it's got a chain on it, because that's precious. And meanwhile, they don't have a toilet. I don't quite get it.
It's just interesting, that idea of the IP around these sustainable practices that are part of everyday life, and the kind of hand skills that are there, and actually the idea that you could sit and properly document that.
Yeah, that's kind of, that's part of what we have here.
Yeah.
What we're proposing with this, we really wanted to frighten the people, just overwhelm them. That it's a holistic approach, because when you get funding, they always say, "Well, we'll fund that." And we're saying it's not about that. It's like being a good woman and running your household. You know how to manage, negotiate multiplicity. You have to do this. You can't just get up and sweep one room. You have to cook. You have to clean. You have to make sure the kids. That's what it takes. It takes thoughtful overview of what really needs to be done, and to see how you push all those initiatives forward here and there. Like they're all moving at the same time. So the idea of the Community Resource Center is it's a place that's for the community, okay, school, the businesses, the local chieftaincy, the stakeholders, the teachers and the students. That's everybody that should be part of this resource center. they're the people that should be part of the governance of that resource center. And at the same time, we should have strategic alliances because it can't just happen in the village. We need to reach out, for example, around, say, the traffic literacy. Then we should also be making contact with, with the Department of Vehicles and Road Safety, okay? We should be making contact with the Zoom Lion guy who can help pick up trash before that beach is so filthy nobody wants to go there. You know, the same time that you're talking about education, and then you're talking about, yes, somebody should actually be gathering all that information that people have about farming. You know, traditionally people had many crops. You know, you had your palm trees, but among the palm trees they were growing other vegetables and other things. You know, to get back to that kind of knowledge that people had rather than just throwing it all out the window. You know, and to continue the phonics instruction, but how do you engage teachers in that? You know, and then, you know, looking at some of the traditional occupations, agriculture, and with the tourism, you want people to come to that community. You know, but you want them to come purposefully, because tourism can be wretched, what it can do to a community if it's not thoughtful. We all
More
know.
questions. Lawrence, I think level there, and then
Just this morning I had a phone call from a friend of mine who was working up in the north of Ghana in a little village called Togo. And he was phoning on his smartphone from this little plantation that he just planted of acacia and mahogany trees just a few months ago. And in the dry season they're growing like crazy because he's been employing very sophisticated technology about how to grow trees in a dry climate. And we were talking about buying a pump, which would cost about 2,500 cedis, about 500 pounds, to pump water from this dam that, with local people, mainly the women, they built by hand. And there's now a lot of water there. They're planning to breed tilapia in the water, and at the same time they are using the pump to pump the water into this tree plantation where they're going to be growing vegetables in between the trees.
Fantastic.
And this is the same sort of idea that you've got here. It's a gradually developing community resource centre. It started about 20 years ago, but it's really now beginning to take off. But like I think you were saying, it takes quite a long time to build relationships, to build the trust, and to find the people with whom you can work.
Exactly.
And it turns out it's mainly the women. The men are a bit of a dead loss.
You mean that's universal?
It's mainly the women.
thanks very much.
Yeah, it strikes me as the universal thing is that people become devalued from all these sort of corporate approaches that you're describing. And you work predominantly with children with education, but do you see that that's the first thing that kind of dies a death, is that once these approaches come in, once corporate sort of approaches affect lives of people, that's the first thing that actually is damaged, is people's self-value, their autonomy. And do you see a change in what the work that you've done? Do you see a change in people's value? Does that come back as a process of what you do?
I think I'm just scratching the surface. I've actually just been learning all this, and all these little revelations have just revealed themselves. But I'm absolutely sure that collective work and effort reap some value. And I mean, the corporations are there. Again, and it's just like everywhere. I mean, you have discussions here all over Europe about the role of corporations. You know, it's the same discussion we need to have there. And in fact, probably what we want to do is, before they get there and get the foothold that they have here in the way they have that foothold, is, since we know better, we might like to inform that process.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. Please feel free to recharge your glass if you'd like and mingle and chat, but please join me in thanking very much our speaker, Renee.
Can I thank John? I can take 2 seconds and thank John so much for this opportunity to come in. That's it. Can I thank Morak? Morak, thank you too for your always being there in the hospitality. And I'd also like to acknowledge somebody. I just can't help but do this. You know, I was a Madison resident teacher years ago, and there was a young 15-year-old boy who is now this incredible man, and his father was one of the first people to help support Kokrobitey Institute. He just happens to be here, so John, you have to stand up. Yesterday we were having so much fun with Proverbs, and I just have to say this: it's a long road that doesn't turn.